Someone typed a single question into Grok AI. What is the real location of Noah's Ark? They were not expecting a definitive answer. Nobody who has studied this question seriously expects a definitive answer. Archaeologists have been searching for physical evidence of the Ark for over a century. Explorers have climbed Mount Ararat dozens of times. Governments have restricted access to key sites for decades. Mainstream academia has largely treated the entire question as mythology, not worth serious investigation. And yet when Grok processed everything available, every ancient text, every geological survey, every soil analysis, every ground-penetrating radar scan, every cross-cultural flood narrative from every civilization on Earth, what it returned was not the dismissal people expected. It was a structured, evidence-based analysis pointing to a specific location in eastern Turkey that has been sitting in plain sight since 1948, a formation that matches the biblical dimensions of the Ark almost exactly, that contains soil chemistry completely, inconsistent with its surrounding geology, that has underground tunnels and angular structures running through it 4 meters below the surface, and that sits 18 miles south of the mountain the Bible names as the Ark's resting place. The answer Grok gave was not confirmation. It was something more unsettling than confirmation. It was the systematic laying out of evidence that mainstream institutions have spent decades either ignoring or explaining away, presented by a machine that had no institutional reputation to protect and no reason to avoid the conclusion the data points toward. Before going into what Grok found and what the evidence at the specific site actually shows, you have to understand why this question has been treated as fringe for so long, and why that treatment does not survive serious scrutiny. The story of a catastrophic global flood that destroyed civilization and was survived by one family who built a massive vessel to preserve life is not unique to the Bible. It appears in the ancient Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, which predates the biblical account and describes a flood survivor named Utnapishtim, who builds a boat at divine instruction, loads it with animals and family, and watches the world drown beneath him. It appears in ancient Hindu texts, where the god Vishnu warns Manu of a coming flood and instructs him to build a ship. It appears in ancient Chinese mythology, in ancient Greek accounts of Deucalion and Pyrrha, in Mesoamerican indigenous traditions, in Native American oral histories, in ancient Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets that archaeologists have been studying for over a century. The Smithsonian Institution has documented more than 200 flood myths from cultures across every inhabited continent, 200 independent traditions separated by oceans, by millennia, and by every conceivable barrier to cultural exchange, all telling variations of the same story. A catastrophic flood, a warned survivor, a vessel, a landing on high ground, the survival of life, the reset of civilization. Grok did not dismiss this convergence as coincidence. It applied the same analytical framework it would apply to any data set with that level of cross-cultural consistency. When 200 independent civilizations with no meaningful contact record the same. Catastrophic event, the most statistically defensible conclusion, is not that they all independently invented the same myth. It is that something happened. Something massive, something water-related, something traumatic, enough to embed itself into the foundational stories of every surviving human culture. What that event was, how large it was, whether it matches the biblical description of a global flood, or whether it was a catastrophic regional event in the ancient Near East that felt global to the people who survived it, those are questions the data does not definitively answer. But the existence of a real catastrophic flood event in human prehistory is, according to Grok's analysis, the most logically supportable interpretation of the available evidence. That is where the story starts. And it is why the question of where the Ark landed, if it was a real vessel, is a question worth taking seriously with real scientific tools. The site that Grok's analysis focused on is called the Durupinar Formation. It sits in eastern Turkey in Agri province, approximately 18 miles south of the summit of Mount Ararat, Turkey's tallest mountain at over 5,000 meters. The formation sits at approximately 6,500 feet above sea level. It is boat-shaped. That is not a metaphorical description or an enthusiast's wishful interpretation. It is literally shaped like a boat, with a defined hull outline, a raised central ridge running along its length, and a symmetrical tapered form that is immediately recognizable when seen from the air as hull-shaped. The formation was first identified by a Kurdish shepherd after heavy rainfall and seismic activity in May 1948 eroded the mud covering that had buried it. It was photographed from the air by a Turkish military pilot in 1959, and the images attracted immediate attention from researchers and institutions, including the Geodetic Institute of Turkey, which declared at the time that the object was not a natural formation. The dimensions of the Durupinar Formation are 515 feet long and 86 feet wide. The book of Genesis describes Noah's Ark as 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Using the Egyptian royal cubit, which is the measurement standard most consistent with the ancient Near Eastern context of the Genesis account, 300 cubits converts to approximately 515 feet. The match is not approximate, it is almost exact. That dimensional correspondence has been known since 1959, and mainstream archaeology has spent 67 years explaining it away as coincidence. Here is what changed in 2025 and 2026, and why the question is no longer something that can be easily dismissed. A research team led by Andrew Jones of the Noah's Ark Scans project, working in collaboration with Turkish and American geophysicists, soil scientists, and archaeologists through a formal partnership between Agri Ibrahim Seçkin University and Istanbul Technical University, has conducted the most comprehensive scientific investigation of the Darupinar site ever undertaken. They have used ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, LiDAR scanning, infrared thermography, and systematic soil sampling across 22 separate collection points inside and outside the formation. And what they found is not ambiguous. It is statistically staggering. The ground-penetrating radar scans revealed that the Darupinar formation is not solid rock. Beneath the surface, there are angular structures extending approximately 6 meters down. There is a 13-foot-wide central corridor running along the length of the formation. There are 3 distinct underground layers that correspond structurally to what the Book of Genesis describes as the 3 decks of the Ark. There are tunnel-like features running 4 meters below the surface, approximately 2 meters high, going down the center of the boat shape and along the inside edge of the hull outline. These are not features consistent with a natural correspondence, subsurface, angular geometry, central corridor structure, layered internal organization, anomalous soil chemistry, elevated organic matter, elevated potassium, presence of worked anchor stones, and marine fossil evidence, all concentrated in and around one specific boat-shaped formation 18 miles from the mountain the Bible names as the Ark's resting place. The probability that all of these anomalies are simultaneously present in a natural geological formation by coincidence is, according to Grok's analysis, extremely low. The machine did not say it is the Ark. It said the evidence does not support the conclusion that it is not. The mainstream scientific response to the Darupinar research has been cautious dismissal. Many geologists maintain that the formation is composed of iron-rich limonite that naturally formed its boat-like shape through the interaction of the underlying geology with the surrounding mudflow. They point out that boat shapes in geology are not unheard of, and that the dimensional correspondence with the biblical measurements is coincidence. They note that no definitive wood artifacts or clearly made objects have been excavated from the site. These are legitimate scientific objections, and the Noah's Ark Scans team does not dispute them. What the team disputes is the conclusion that the objections justify. The absence of excavated wood artifacts is not evidence that wood is absent. The soil chemistry showing triple the organic matter inside versus outside the formation is evidence of something biological, decomposing inside the structure over a long period of time. The angular subsurface geometry is evidence of organized internal structure. The 13-foot central corridor is evidence of a constructed passageway, THCE. The research team argues the cumulative case has moved beyond the threshold where dismissal is the scientifically defensible position, regardless of institutional comfort, with the 3 subsurface layers matching the biblical deck count, is either coincidence or correspond an alternative, geological formation. Natural mudflows and erosion do not produce symmetrical angular subsurface structures with central corridors and layered interiors. They produce irregular compressed material with no consistent internal geometry. What the radar is finding inside the Darupinar formation looks like the internal structure of a built object, not the random compression of a natural mudflow. The soil analysis is where the evidence becomes genuinely difficult to explain away. Soil scientist William Crabtree, a member of the Noah's Ark Scans research team, collected samples from 22 locations inside and outside the formation and subjected them to laboratory analysis. The results showed that organic matter inside the formation is 3 times higher than in the surrounding soil taken from just outside the formation boundary. Potassium levels inside the formation are 40% higher than outside. The pH readings are different. The entire chemical profile of the soil inside the boat-shaped outline is statistically distinct from the surrounding geological material in every meaningful measurement. Crabtree stated the implications plainly. If you know soil science, you will understand that potassium levels, organic matter, and pH can all be affected by the decomposition of organic materials. If this was a wooden vessel and the wood had rotted over time over thousands of years, we would expect to see increased potassium levels, changes in pH, and higher organic content. That is exactly what we find. The soil inside the Darupinar formation has the chemical signature of decomposed wood. The soil immediately outside it does not. This is not a minor variation. The difference is statistically staggering, according to Andrew Jones, who has called the soil results perhaps the most compelling evidence for a man-made origin of the formation that the team has produced. There is additional physical evidence surrounding the site that Grok's analysis flagged as significant, and that most mainstream reporting on this story has ignored almost entirely. Scattered across the landscape surrounding the Drupanar Formation, researchers have discovered at least 26 massive stones with holes bored through their tops. These are not naturally occurring objects. They are clearly worked stone, shaped by human hands, each one weighing many tons. The holes bored through their tops are consistent with the function of drogue stones, ancient anchoring devices used on large vessels to provide drag and stabilization in heavy seas. Drogue stones of this type have been documented in ancient maritime archaeology, and the ones found near the Drupanar site match the scale and construction that would be appropriate for a vessel of the Ark's described dimensions. The presence of 26 massive worked anchor stones in the vicinity of a boat-shaped formation that matches the biblical dimensions of the Ark is not something that fits comfortably into the natural geological formation explanation. Grok's analysis of all this evidence was careful and precise in a way that both frustrated and impressed the people who reviewed it. The machine did not declare that Noah's Ark has been found. It did not conclude that the Genesis account is literally true in every detail. What it did was lay out the cumulative weight of the evidence at the Drupanar site and assess it against the hypothesis that the formation is a natural geological structure. And it found that hypothesis increasingly difficult to defend in light of the specific combination of dimensional. What Grok highlighted that most commentators have not focused on is the question of why it took. Researchers examining the site have also found marine fossils at the 6,500-foot elevation of the formation. Coral and shell fragments at that altitude are used by geologists to demonstrate the slow tectonic uplift of former seabeds over millions of years. But their presence at the specific location of the Drupanar Formation adds to a picture of a site whose geological history is unusual regardless of what explanation you prefer. Additionally, the grass and vegetation inside the formation boundary exhibits distinctive behavior compared to the surrounding area. In autumn, it turns lighter and more yellow in a pattern that is inconsistent with the surrounding terrain and that researchers attribute to the presence of open cavities beneath the surface, consistent with an enclosed structure that has not completely filled with compacted material. Until 2025 and 2026 for this level of scientific investigation to be conducted at a site that has been known since 1959. The formation was identified 67 years ago. Its dimensions were noted to match the biblical specifications within a year of its discovery. The Geodetic Institute of Turkey declared it non-natural in 1959. And yet the comprehensive geophysical survey using modern ground-penetrating radar, the systematic soil sampling across 22 locations, the electrical resistivity, tomography, the LiDAR scanning, none of it happened until a team of researchers with no institutional funding and no university backing decided to do it themselves. The formal Turkish-American research partnership through Agri Ibrahim Seçen University and Istanbul Technical University, which finally gave the investigation academic credibility, was only launched in 2022. For 63 years after the formation's discovery, mainstream archaeology essentially decided not to look. Grok noted this not as a conspiracy, but as an institutional behavior pattern. Academic institutions do not investigate things they have already categorized as fringe. The categorization itself prevents the investigation. And the investigation that finally happened is producing results that challenge the categorization. The 2026 research program is already underway. The Noah's Ark Scans team has received continued support from Turkish authorities and is expanding geophysical and geological investigations at the site, core. Drilling, which would allow direct sampling of material from inside the subsurface structures detected by the ground-penetrating radar, is planned. A remote-controlled robotic device is being prepared to send into the tunnel structures to explore what lies beneath the surface. If that robotic exploration finds worked wood or animal remains or any artifact inconsistent with natural geological origin, the conversation about this site will change immediately and completely. If it finds only compressed mineral material consistent with a natural formation, the debate will continue with the geological explanation strengthened. Either outcome advances human knowledge. Either outcome is worth knowing. And the fact that it took this long to reach the point of actually looking is itself a haunting reflection of how institutional assumptions can delay the pursuit of truth for decades. What Grok ultimately said about the real location of Noah's Ark is this: the most defensible candidate site, given all available evidence, is the Drupanar Formation in eastern Turkey, approximately 18 miles south of Mount Ararat. The evidence at that site is anomalous in ways that are not adequately explained by natural geological processes. The dimensional correspondence with biblical specifications, the subsurface angular geometry, the central corridor, the layered internal structure, the anomalous soil chemistry showing triple the organic matter inside versus outside, the presence of worked anchor stones in the surrounding area, and the site's location in the region the Bible names as the Ark's resting place, collectively constitute a body of evidence that warrants serious, comprehensive scientific investigation. The investigation that is now underway is the first time in 67 years that the site has been studied with modern tools. The results so far do not confirm the presence of Noah's Ark. They do not rule it out. They make it significantly harder to dismiss. That is what the machine found when it was asked a question that human institutions had decided was not worth asking seriously. It found evidence that has been accumulating since 1948, that matches predictions made by one of the oldest texts in human history, that sits in a location that matches the geographic description in that same text, and that was largely ignored by the institutions with the tools and the authority to investigate it properly for nearly 7 decades. Whether the Darupanar Formation is the resting place of a real vessel that survived a real catastrophic flood 4,000 years ago is a question that current evidence cannot definitively answer. But it is a question the evidence demands be taken seriously, and the machine that finally said so plainly did not need institutional permission to follow the data where it leads.